Starseeds. This is Oriah with United Starseed Connections group on Facebook, and this is Cosmic Coffee. I'm here with Alastair from the UK, and I'm coming to you from Malibu, California. And we are two transformational junkies that love to exchange ideas. He is a transformational alchemist. I have been a shaman for 10 years, and we just like to uncover and discover everything there is to know about creation, metaphysics, quantum mechanics, you name it, we like to talk about it. And we just have so much fun together. So why don't you join us, get yourself a tea or a coffee and sit down, and we will jump in. Today's conversation, Alastair, is going to be about duality. And Alastair and I talk about this pretty much every day. It's our favorite topic. How do you feel about duality in general? Just which, off the top of your head, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you? What's your feeling on it?
I really dislike it. I really dislike duality because it is, if you look at it all the way back, duality is the source of all of our problems. This idea of one thing versus another thing, and whatever that thing and that thing may be, is usually creates so much strife, not just in ourselves but on the outside as well.
Do you know, I feel that people don't even realize that they're having a dualistic approach to anything. I think it's very routine. There's no consciousness or awareness to when they're speaking or their actions.
Well, this is it. It's a very human concept, I think, and I think part of the human experience is duality, and it just kind of comes in as part of like the baseline level programming. So everyone just accepts it as the norm. They accept good, they accept bad, but what their idea of good versus what someone else's idea of bad could be the opposite, and then it just gets crazy very quickly.
Very quickly. Well, isn't the holistic approach one in which you pull yourself back and get a bigger perspective of both yin yang, male, female, light, dark, contrasting duality, and you get an opportunity to see everything as a whole? And isn't that the goal, you would think?
100%. I think seeing the circle rather than the line, as we are fond of saying, because if we can adopt that stance, then everything becomes accessible. Everything is on the table. Everything has a certain degree of measure to it. I wouldn't say it's valid in all cases because of, the accepting and rejecting of information, again, is a very personal thing. So essentially, if we're going to pull back, we then get into the discussion of perspective. And perspective, if we were all looking at the same thing, we could see a different observation depending on where we were looking at this thing. So like we were all looking at a ball and we're all stood around it, and we see this ball that's supposed to be a uniform object, but it's got its little nuances in how it's made. There's little imperfections. Depending on where we're at can influence what we're seeing. So for me, the idea of duality kind of takes that possibility of having a wider perspective on an issue out of the conversation. So to say that something is ultimately bad or something is ultimately good is really damaging. And if we can't pull out, if we can't zoom right out and check out the different, the wider perspective that encompasses more viewpoints, more conversations, it's inclusive rather than exclusive, then I just think it's a very damaging place to be in. And we can trace that all the way back through human history, because there's always been things in opposition to each other. And we're living in a moment now where duality is being put under the microscope, but maybe not in such explicit terms. There's a lot of conversations happening around the world about a lot of things that ultimately lead to oneness. And just by dealing with those kind of micros within the macro, even though they're pretty big issues, will allow us to move beyond duality in due course, but in a more organic way. Because if we say, let's just move beyond duality, people are going to go, well, what do you mean? What is duality? Can I buy one of those? Do I have one of those in my house? You've got to bring people in.
It's so true. Yeah. Duality is contrasting beliefs. for those of you who are unsure of what duality is basically that there is a polar opposite to a perspective. And in that polar opposite, there's judgments and opinions of whether or not this thing is a good thing, a valid thing, it has any right to be there, versus the other side. So one side is better than the other side, that conversation. And if you go back to children when they were toddlers, you know, you're not really in that conversation. You're in the conversation of exploration, curiosity. So it's like our evolution as a human race can go into the perspective of more of a scientific and engineering perspective. If you were an architect or a scientist looking at an organism or looking at a building or looking at the possibilities of new structures, you're not looking at what's good and bad in the sense of that it's an emotional risk, you're losing something, there's something bothering you to such a degree that you can't function, or that it's going to elicit negative emotions or any kind of violence from you. It's actually just a non-dualistic approach. You're looking at it from both perspectives, but you're just seeing the whole picture of how things can be adjusted, what we can do to change things. It's more of an engineering point of view. In some ways, you can look at it that way. Or oneness. It's the same kind of concept because you're one with your experience that you're having. You're not in any contrast with your own experience as the observer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does 100%. And I think it was interesting where you were there talking about curiosity and the dualistic nature of certain things is like the antidote to curiosity. In that, if we take, for example, institutions such as the church, they're by rights, they don't really encourage us to be curious. We are encouraged and in some cases enforced to accept without question.
Without, that's the key, because do you notice that they don't recommend you asking questions? When I was growing up in the Christian religion, they said that the question mark looks like the symbol of the serpent, which is the symbol of the devil, which of course, as we know, it's transformation, and many other things that are far from being a devil, but the question mark itself. So they're basically, the programming started, you know, I was born into the Christian church. So the programming started at an early age. Do not ask questions. We will give you information. Do not look anywhere else. And oh, by the way, we are the only ones that know the answer here.
Yeah, we had to, I mean, I wasn't in the Christian faith, but there was a heavy thread of Christianity through my primary school. So we had that kind of exposure to the bright light in the face, like, oh, what is this? And essentially you're being told at home that all religions are valid, everyone is preaching the same truth, but then you go to school and you've got some of the teachers saying that, well, yeah, everyone worships the same God, but our God's better.
Right.
Our God is a more benevolent God. And I'm like, hang on a minute, we just read like some of the Old Testament the other day, and what's some of the stuff that went down in that? Is that the same dude? And it's like,
right.
Quiet.
You notice those same people who are teaching that are now very unhappy with what is currently going on, because they're definitely in the conversation of duality. So they're showing people like, see the other side, they're doing it wrong. This is bad. So, you know, each side, I believe, in politics or in any cultural war, each side has the best interest of the people. Each side feels that their side is going to be the side that's going to help humanity in some way, or help some government of some kind. So there is an altruistic experience that each side is having. It's just not on the same team. So how do you get everybody to come together? And you and I were discussing that we were looking through Facebook and all the different communities and seeing how people were commenting. Oh my God. First of all, I can't even go on my personal feed anymore. Like, it's actually toxic on every level. It's the worst side of humanity I have ever seen in my life. Understandably, I get it. You know, it's all brimming to the surface, but even in the spiritual communities, you know, even in the starseed communities and the group communities, I'm seeing so many dualistic conversations with lots of anger and self-righteousness on picking sides. Do you have some words on that?
I got a lot of words. I was just kind of like having to sort of let it go through. My face was like telling the
Right.
story. Yeah, my God, man, like seriously,
Right.
what on earth is going on? Like, why? There seems to be this great trend that I've observed in the different groups that are kind of revolving around the new age ideas, cosmic ideas, and this kind of conspirituality thing that's going on
I
about
have to
how
interrupt you before we go any further. I want to make a disclosure that we're not addressing racism in this conversation. This is simply everything but that conversation. I'm going to speak for my fellow white friend. I don't think we have any right to say anything about anything in this area unless we choose to, but ultimately this is a silent topic in this show right now. And I want to
that's
be
it.
very clear about that.
I am mixed race myself. I'm half Iranian, half Scottish, and
And
I
I'm
have.
half Spanish, which you can't tell too much, maybe.
But this is the thing. It's for that conversation. It's we handing the mic over.
Correct. Correct.
Hand the
So
mic over.
what
We
we're
listen.
discussing is politics. We're discussing spiritual warfare. We're discussing COVID-19. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, without saying those words, what we're talking about is the idea that duality exists just so that we can feel like a human race. People feel they have to take sides, which is
Mm.
beyond baffling to me as a soul. I am so interested in the conversation of what will it take to change this course of thinking. How far back do we need to go this programming? Can you tell us how far back you have tracked or traced where the
Well,
beginning of duality began?
I mean, it depends really. If you want to take the Gnostic idea, duality began at creation, with the universe being created by accident, and then the creator God spending the rest of eternity trying to snuff out this mistake. So there is that. And, it's recorded as far back as Zoroastrianism, we did have a look into Hinduism as well, but, ancient Hinduism versus modern Hinduism, there's, it's difficult to draw a line between the two, because like we go back to the ancient practices, it's more about fire worship. And then the stuff that we know today is very different from what it was many thousands of years ago. So it really, it's hard to kind of put a definitive finger on where this began, because
It comes down to, it has to be within the cultural belief of this versus that. So I'll give you an example. In some cultures, if it rains on your wedding, that is considered good luck, and that is a gift.
Yep.
Like it rained on my wedding right as I was about to give my vows. The rain came down, and I had to be reminded of this, because of course the first place I went was like, no. So some other cultures are like, oh, the gift from the gods, you just got blessed, this is just, you are now in the holiest of holies because you have the rain coming down and blessing your wedding. And then other people feel the opposite. It also is the same with death. There's some cultures that celebrate your death and will actually put on a big kind of celebration type of party. I don't know what they would exactly call it, but in different cultures, I know that happens. And in this culture, when there's death, we're not happy for the person who dies, and we're not happy that they died, and we're very, very sad. So I think this duality starts in these types of cultural identifications of this is good and that is not good.
Yeah, especially in the West as well, because in the West, it was this great quote. I was watching an interview with Graham Hancock, and he was talking about his experience with the shamans in Peru. And they're saying that they view all the problems in the West are because Western society has severed its connection with spirit, the bottom line between everything. And in that way of thinking, we are essentially really hung up on the finite existence of these avatars, these meat suits that we are experiencing this reality in, because essentially when it's done, it's done. And if you've not lived your life in a certain way, you're going to go and get poked with sticks for all eternity, or you're going to go and sit on a cloud, which both things are literally impossible. You know, heaven and hell is a state of mind. You know, afterlife is just the afterlife. Everything's energy. It can't be made or broken. It just changes. And if we can't get past this idea that this is all I am, it's rubbish. There's a lot more to who we are than what we can see, because we can perceive beyond. If we have access to imagination, then you know that's an indicator of something there. And if we can move beyond this idea that when the body dies, that's the end, or when the body dies, we get sent to the good place or the bad place. This idea of duality beyond death, this is nonsense. It's complete and utter nonsense, just to keep us scared, obedient, under control, and propping up ways of thinking that didn't even serve us in the first place.
Right. Well, I'm going to launch a kind of sensitive topic area about Trump.
Okay.
I said it. I said the word.
Will this get me banned from entering the United States?
It's like saying Voldemort.
I know, right?
You can't say that word. But anyway, okay, so I said it, Trump. Okay. Here's my thoughts on it. Okay. I think what Trump represents, I think what the virus represents, I think what lockdown represents is more important to me than the actual thing, because everything is representative anyway. Everything is symbology anyway. You're always looking at something that represents something else. You're always looking at the symbol of what that thing represents, because that's how our brain processes information anyway. So what does the sun represent? Healing, health. Some people think it's going to burn their crops. So it's what the symbol of, you know, the thing is. So Trump represents something. The virus represents something. And the lockdown represents something. So if you were to put it all together and look at where it's all pointing in one direction. It's pointing in the individual. It's pointing to you, us as an individual. Each person is having to reevaluate their lives, their belief systems, their way of seeing things. They're either being too quiet or too loud, either pull back or come forward. Everybody's reevaluating the way they're doing everything, from finances, paying bills, going to work, paying rent, having a high credit score, not caring about money versus caring about money, versus spirituality versus non-spirituality, versus freedom versus creativity and freedom. All these conversations are coming to the surface. Everybody is reevaluating. So it looks like a mass consciousness is happening in evolution. Sure, and it is, but it's really within the individual. And each one of us, our battery packs, these cells here, are being really, really activated from what is happening. So you could say the virus is an activator, Trump is an activator, China is an activator, you know, the lockdown is an activator, because ultimately that's where the energy is going. That's what we're seeing, is the base is bubbling up. And so it's really a giant activation that is occurring. If you look at it from that perspective, it takes the duality out of it. And that's how I wanted to show how I get out of the dualistic type of thinking. So I just demonstrated right there, bringing in something that's a heavy topic, and see how fast I was able to remove all the stings and barbs so no one's getting hurt. And I just basically go to the big picture. So I just wanted to show that example of how I do that.
That was pretty good, because I had a moment there. I was like,
I know, it gets scary.
Like, oh crap. Because, you know, in a lot of these groups, you know, Facebook, Reddit, all this kind of stuff, where we talk about a lot of these things, they are viewing these manifestations of this situation all as like, you know, light versus dark. And I'm not into that, you know, I'm not into that. I think like we could, like we're talking about representations, I can get behind that. I can get behind that individuals can be a representation of an idea, or a representation of a culture or a way of doing things. We're the same in the UK right now. You
Mhm.
know, there's a lot of conversations happening around, or what does it mean to be British, and talking about the history and everything, and matters that we have put a disclaimer that we wouldn't discuss, but are at the forefront of the conversation.
Mm.
And the representation of that is interesting to me, and the how we are kind of looking at like, well, oh well, what you know, where do I sit? What side do I pick? And blah blah blah. And I'm like, well, I don't want to pick a side. Like, I'd rather like be at the party that everyone's invited to and we're having a great time. But
Do
I
you know
understand
what?
that we,
Sorry,
sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I was just say, but I understand that we may have to build that, we may have to have some conversations around that, and we may have to begin to look beyond these systems of structure of politics and belief and self-identification, and not get too hung up on the differences between personal liberty and personal autonomy. With, for example, the mask debate, you know,
Right.
I, you know, that kind of stuff. Like, it's becoming like a situation where you can't just say do this because it's actually kind of going to help everyone, and be like, well, but what about how I feel? And it's like, well, no one really cares how you feel. It's about how you act on your feelings, and with that creates greater harmony. But it seems to be that there's more discord happening in the process, but I guess that is natural as things expand and contract and we move forward, and there's that kind of, we're moving into a new place, but we have to kind of open it up a bit, you know, so there's more space to move.
Definitely. And that more space to move is exactly what people are doing. I think at home, people are, there's like a reevaluation of whether or not they're supposed to be happy or sad right now.
Mm.
And there are people that I know for sure are very depressed, that have been crying regularly. In some areas, I totally understand the buildup, you know, of the trauma. So I understand, but there's other people that are crying because they can't believe that the systems that they have depended on, that they thought were real, that they thought were the bottom line, that these systems are now what they see as breaking. Now,
Mm.
those of us who have been studying these systems and algorithms and patterns of society and behavior, we're seeing them as simply train tracks, just readjusting and changing
Yeah.
locations to have a better view, to have a better ride. We're actually just readjusting. And and so it's, you see, it's just this new way of thinking. Some people have said to me, you know, why are you so happy? Like, how can you be so content? And I said, oh, because see, this form of duality of looking at life that's positive and negative and it's painful versus non-painful, I have already been in that study for many decades, and I
Mm.
got my degree in understanding how to suffer in the middle of a dualistic life. And that is why I worked so hard to get out of it, is
Mm.
because I didn't want to suffer anymore. So here I am to talk about what I did and how I did it. And it just so happens that everything that's happening on the planet is happening, and I now can talk about something that I've already graduated from. So
Yeah.
I've already done this. Many spiritual people or people that are on this conscious path feel that way, that we've already paid our dues. We've already
this
been through this.
this is it. This is the fascinating for me, because uh, you know, for December 21st 2012, the big date of doom, was actually the beginning of my, you know, someone hitting the button on the warp drive for me, you know, and then everything just starts to change. So I felt ready for this. Not to say that, you know, it doesn't mean that you're immune. It doesn't mean that you don't have days where you feel up and then you maybe feel lower in terms of your mood spectrum, but it's natural. You know, we're not robots, and we shouldn't be like la 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 la, everything's great. But
Yeah, because that's another form of not being aware.
exactly, you know, and then we get
I just
into the
thought,
bypassing
yeah.
discussion there as well. You know, this great everything's love and light and blah blah blah, and it's rubbish to think like that all the time, because if there wasn't some degree of discomfort, then there will be no innovation, and
Does
discomfort.
that tell you that you're a human being, to just
Yeah,
feel a little bit of that friction, that tension of being alive? I mean, you can
yeah,
be as happy as you want, but there's a real there. You're in a realistic experience where there's realities.
that's it. And if there is not some pressure applied upon you, whether that's by yourself or external factors, because even if everything's great, you know, say like we're in the mansions, we're sat there being like, hey man, this is wicked, and we're doing this show poolside and everything's great, we would have to be the ones turning our own screws to make sure that we're still motivated and doing things and not just submitting to a life of pacification. As much as there is no romance in living out of, you know, half-baked bean cans and you've got no heating in your house, but
Right.
you're somehow really enlightened. It's, again, the dualism there.
That
It
is
doesn't
very
make sense.
fascinating. I'm really glad you brought that up. And I'd like to go a little deeper into it since we're touching on these very touchy subjects.
Well,
So
let's do it.
there
Let's,
are people that are suffering greatly financially and around the world that are in dire straits right now and could consider this a very dualistic experience. I would say there is an opportunity here for everyone to take hold of these situations and either decide whether or not you're going to be a slave to them, to allow it to run your life or run you over, or you will rise from the ashes like a phoenix, like you will become a new human being. I mean, there are people in all parts of the world that have made these choices, that have decided whether or not they should stand and be something else for their community or be something else for their family or for themselves. And it was because of these experiences. By the way, that's why Alastair and I haven't said this yet. We actually are not opposed to the idea of duality as its proper like position that it plays to activate. It's when you become enslaved. I want to clear that part up because there's reasons, like I'm here and you're here because we had dualistic experiences that activated us. And then you get to a point where you appreciate that and then you grow from that experience. And it's not that we're making dualistic experiences wrong, but we're showing you how you don't have to be enslaved to that conversation and just stay there. I didn't mean to go on and on. So.
No. It's interesting because like what you're saying is the group that you set up on Facebook was this kind of, I remember seeing the post, I can't remember what the original group was that it was posted in, but you'd said something like, oh, I'm just tired of all of this nonsense, I'm going to set up my own thing. And I was like, that's a bit like, I like that, that's a bit audacious and kind of pointing the finger saying this is not the way. And then on the back of that, joining the group and then having the discussions and some of the experiences I had and a lot of the work that I do around like transformation of perception, showing that essentially duality doesn't exist out there, it exists in here and there, and how this information is processed and then comes out, you know. I think that if people were able to see beyond their little garden, the nice little walled garden they've created for themselves, full of lovely flowers and all this kind of if they could see beyond that and understand that that forms part of a greater landscape, there wouldn't be half the problems that we do have. And it's interesting when we're talking about manifestations of systems in people and ideas and this sense of not being able to feel safe on the earth, not being able to feel safe to go out and see your friends, don't feel safe to get on the bus, don't feel safe to get on the plane, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. Like this idea of now suddenly everyone's supposed to be scared.
Right.
And, you know, isn't like that's okay, but isn't it better to be brave, which was like acting in the awareness of fear?
Absolutely.
Not, you know, trying to like bypass your fear, but acting, you acknowledge that it's there and you still go and do your thing, and
That's
you still
right.
go and
It's like you're creating alchemy with that experience. You're creating a meal. So I have 5 children and they all are independent and they all like to be out there in the world right now. And I have to deal with that as a mother at home. I have to deal with who are they around? Who are they connecting to? Are they safe? And if I were to allow myself to go into that fear structure again, after I work so hard to get out of that, I am not only going to be teaching them to be in fear, but I'm also going to be hurting my body. I'm literally going to physically have anxiety attacks and panic attacks, and I'm not going to feel good after I've worked so hard to get here. So I wasn't willing to have anything take that, this equilibrium and this peace and this balance that I have fought for. And I'm not letting anything take that. I don't care what virus, I don't care what government, nobody has a right to take my peace from me and my happiness and my joy of living and having my cells vibrating at a high frequency and a capacity to heal on an instantaneous basis. I am not a slave, and I am not here to let somebody dictate and tell me how I'm supposed to organize the cells in my body. Thank you very much. So how I teach my children is education. So we say, here's what's happening, here's what's going on, here's what you need to know, here's what you can do about it, and here's the best steps of actions to take. The end. I don't talk about it again. It is for them to understand how to walk on this earth. It is for them to understand how to put one foot in front of the other. It is for them to understand how to stay alive with proper education. That's all I can do. Anything other than that is martyr. I'm going to go into martyrdom, the sacrificial lamb. I'll be once again a part of the masses, once again led by the nose. Once again, I'll be told what to do. And isn't that what my emancipation was all about to begin with? So I'm not willing to go back to those days. I don't care what's going on.
Well, why should you? What purpose would it serve? What good would you be to be boxed into your own head and in your own house, probably in a small space in that house? What good would you be, not to the world, but to yourself?
Truly. There's no oxygen if you are suffocating yourself. Now, people would say, well, do you wear a mask? What's your personal take? So here's my personal take. When I go outside, when I'm walking around in the air and there's no one around me, I don't wear a mask. If there's nobody I see around me, I'm just walking. Now, if I'm near people and nobody else is wearing masks, I decide whether or not that's safe for me. How do I feel? What does my intuition tell me? Do I feel bad about that situation? Maybe I should put a mask. If I don't feel bad, but I'm not even putting myself in a situation where there's a lot of people without masks. So I don't know. And I'm not going out of my way to be avoided. It's just not my interest right now.
Yeah.
Now, as far as being around people in general, so let's say I have to go into the store, or I go into the parking lot, or I'm going to get a coffee out in public, I wear a mask. The reason why I wear a mask is because I'm not here to create a dualistic experience where I need to fight the system, because ultimately the system is co-created by all of us. We're in it together. And if I'm here to create a fight with the system, I don't know exactly how effective I'm going to be. I think I'm more effective if I do my work holistically from the approach that I'm taking here. I have more capacity to give information and to share my power than to do it fighting against the odds. So I'm now taking risks, fighting the dualistic fight of war. Like, I don't feel I need to experience that. Like, this to me feels more holistic. This feels more balanced. This feels like I'm walking down the center line and I can have a conversation where people get to choose.
Well, that's it. I do the same thing in that, you know, if I'm out, there's no one there. It's like I'm in the park and it's quiet, no mask. If I go into the shops, I go on public transport. I've only been in public transport once this whole time, and that was yesterday. And in that situation, I have a mask. I get the stuff, I clean my hands. Sometimes I wear the gloves. You know, I don't want to be part in someone else's story that's negative, you know.
That's a very good way of saying it.
And for me to have peace of mind is I kind of like, well, what would I appreciate? And I've seen the scientific videos of the micro droplets and all this stuff, and I'm like, cool, great. I'm not going to let that scare me. I'm just going to go, that means wear your mask in the shop, wear your mask on the bus, but then don't freak out if you're in the park and people aren't wearing masks. It's like, okay, that's their decision, you know. Because then again, there's the opposition in how do we deal with this thing when we're supposed to be, you know, planet Earth has been basically all sent us to our room to have a sit down and think about what we've done.
So how do you feel about, there's many people that have died and have crossed over, And there's people who are religious, non-religious, spiritual family members that were left behind that are dealing with the grief and dealing with the loss of a family member, which is the worst thing you could experience as a human being. So as you are experiencing this type of death, I have been sending out this like psychic message to all families that are grieving. And I haven't said it verbally yet, but this is a great platform for me to do so, is to understand, yes, it is heavy gravity in the emotional spectrum, for sure. There is deep, deep polarizing experiences of anger and fear and upset over why they had to go this way. And some people have lost entire families. So the only thing I can say, the only thing I know is that as a conscious being, as consciousness itself, there are no accidents. So there's no one signing up to die that didn't want to participate the way they did for the greater good, for the higher calling of evolution for the planet. You don't know if your loved one decided that their leaving the planet would be helping activate more people like yourself to engage in different types of activities, to show yourself your own freedoms and your own ways of being. That's an emancipation from the collective consciousness of fear. You don't know if that family member who crossed is a part of your path, your activation. And as you see, so many people are going together at once, hundreds of thousands of people have died. So this is a massive soul exodus. It's like they are lifting and bridging this conversation of emancipation and freedom out into the open. Because isn't that, even with Black Lives Matter, isn't that what's happening? Even with the police brutality, it's all about what are our freedoms? How can we be free as individuals and as a society? So we're really having a conversation about freedom, freedom of speech, censorship, freedom of being, freedom of wellness, freedom of happiness. Now, if there's some angels in your life that decided to cross over during this time, they are actually announcing not their departure, but they're announcing their collective experience with other angels who are doing this to help raise the consciousness and vibration of the planet. Never think your loved one crossed, because they're here to leave you with the heaviness of grief. Consider they're taking a different approach to their existence. They're transitioning into a different realm to help you to activate into a higher set of consciousness within yourself, a higher state. So always look for the higher reasoning, always look for the higher vibration behind it.
I think it's very interesting, and I imagine like a lot of people would find that very hard to hear.
Very hard. That's why I have to say it this way.
But also, it's like we're in like a privileged position of insight as well. So it's like, again, it's kind of like up to us to kind of like, how do we convey this message and idea that kind of doesn't like gloss over people's pain.
Well, here's the best way, I think. It's because I'm married to a psychic medium. Just imagine that. Just imagine that phrase. I'm married to a psychic medium. So that means for 10 years, I have watched, listened, been a part of conversations in my home on a regular basis of people who have had devastating loss with their loved one, husbands, friends, wives, sisters, brothers, sons, daughters, who have crossed in uneventful ways, eventful ways, surprising ways, and they themselves were suicidal. They themselves said, there's no reason for me to be here. If my son was killed, I'm just going to go too, right? So they come to my husband to say, unless you have some words that would make sense to me, then maybe I'll stick around longer. And also when he's channeling, they also say that to him. So I have had the privilege at sitting at this doorstep of this conversation of transitioning through to other dimensions. And it has been the most eye-opening, gut-wrenching experience to witness. But what I have witnessed is if somebody doesn't fight for their own sanity, as the person left behind in a death situation, you have nothing if you do not fight for your own ability to breathe.
Mm.
So this is how come I have to talk like this, because there's such a insane level of pain that people are going through when they experience this death, that if you don't have a straight line to look at, you can also spin out and lose your sanity, go into
Mm.
severe depression, commit suicide yourself, go into drugs, anything to
We like
offset this pain.
turn that pain onto others through acts as well. Yeah,
Yes.
it is very interesting because like I mean, what I was saying was like it's turning, it's important to turn a grief into hope, and then hope turns into faith that becomes unshakable over time. But it's the thing that I think that as much as we can see this, if we so we're talking about zooming out, if we zoom right in for a second, I think the real tragedy is people going through this alone, maybe not necessarily in the space to see the, be able to zoom out and see the wider message. That I think is, of all this experience, that's the one thing I find quite difficult to rationalize amongst it
Yes,
all
it
of it.
is difficult to rationalize. You have to have a connection to other humans at some point,
Mm,
whether you do it on the internet or you find someone in person. But I find it very difficult to go through any type of ascension or any type of awakening alone.
mm,
It takes a great big soul to do that. And you have to be extremely powerful in your own insight to self and your ability to reason with yourself that this is okay for you to be living life with no one helping you.
mm.
So it requires a deep sense of, you have to be very acclimated here on this timeline, I feel, for you to be
Yeah,
able to do this without any support. But I always encourage people to reach out for support. I mean, this is my number one message, is always reach out. That's why I put the Starseed group out. That's why Alastair has his workshop and course study that he's going to be presenting. You also have a radio show, right?
hmm,
And
yeah,
we have this show, and I am always interviewing because I believe in the connecting and the connection of the connection between us all is what actually activates and help us stay kind of going and
yeah,
keep.
definitely,
I'm so
definitely.
grateful for connection. I mean, I don't know what I would do, Alastair, without the connection I have with people.
Well,
I'm
I
grateful
mean,
to be grateful.
it's fantastic because if we look at, let's just say, look at our own personal social landscapes today versus 4 months ago. I mean, I don't know about you, but mine's totally different. You know, like there's maybe like one third is the same people. Make sure you're staying in contact with these people, and then the other two thirds is it's all kind of new, you know, and different people, different places, different
Me too.
things, or maybe folks kind of like piping up, going, "Hey, let's do something, or let's do this," and then new things form out of the old. And again, it's like coming back to what we were saying about like the fear of death and the fear, the whole dualistic nature of existence, where life versus death, and viewing that as a cycle, and like the death being the fertile ground for new life as
Mm-hmm.
well. I think that essentially that brings, that can be the sticking point where hope transitions into faith for a lot of people. That essentially, I mean, what happens at a funeral? A family gets together. Maybe the family doesn't get together very often, or maybe like people are getting together on Zoom, connecting. And maybe there's conversations that happen after that. Maybe people are remembering the things that they shared with the person who has passed. Maybe they had a shared interest or a thing that they would always go and do together, and they do more of that thing. The person's never really dead as long as they're remembered, and the acts, the values that they hold dear are upheld, if those values are constructive and honourable. That kind of stuff is immortality in this realm. Obviously, like if we kind of leave the whole kind of the other realm out of it for a moment,
Right.
um, but the idea that so many people are going, at once, and this isn't over. I feel like it's going to be like this,
Yeah,
this process, which is,
absolutely.
that's fine. It's just the nature of things. I
Absolutely.
saw someone suggest that on one of these nameless higher consciousness groups on Facebook, saying that, oh yeah, it's going to get worse in the autumn, and then like all the comments underneath it were like, whoa, it's a conspiracy, this is going to, and I'm like, no man, like it's flu season, it's the co-effect of the two. Yeah, it's going to be bad. It's just a logical thought.
Yeah.
And
And then you
we're
have to
still
look at like
getting,
work and school and how's that going to go. But people are thinking that, okay, so am I going to go back to work in the fall? Am I going to have my kids go back to school?
mm,
And the fact of the matter is there's going to be a lot of fear around colder temperatures when viruses breed. And there's going to be, I mean, I don't know that much about viruses to say exactly how they work, but I think it becomes more prevalent in the colder
yeah.
seasons. Is that's the feeling I get.
I think so, and I think like just because every year we have the flu,
Right.
and if you've got the flu, it's easy to transmit because you're sneezing and spluttering and your immunes are low. I think like the best thing that we can do is, like we were saying before, is just use your head,
Yeah.
but also like making sure that if we're talking about this recalibration, so as you mentioned earlier about the train lines, I got this vision of like a big station of
Yeah.
loads of different lines that all the
Right.
trains come together, and then they're going to go out in all these different directions, and we're kind of rewiring the tracks and stuff to go in different ways.
Do you know what's so
If we
interesting? On the macro, like you said, we're rewiring the tracks on the macro level, but on the micro level with the individual, we're also doing that. We're
But
rewiring.
exactly, so if we think of stuff that we do have control over, because again, um, I think like retaining the optimism amidst this conversation is so important. Not just for us, because when we say these ideas to each other, we're preaching to the choir because we
Right.
share a lot of the same views. But for those people out there that are watching, it's important to think about what you have control over and what you don't, and be at peace with not being able to control everything, and take those steps. So, for example, we have control
Woo!
over our
That was a big
diets.
statement, Alastair.
Hey, man, I'm
Alastair, that was a big statement what you just said.
I'm just
That
I'm
was
coming
big.
in
I want
hard,
you to go
you
back
know.
to that.
So what
I love that.
being
Go
at peace with
see
the
that
things.
again and really take that home.
All right, this is it. I'm like that recruitment poster. So identify what you have control over and what you don't, and be at peace with not being able to control everything.
I mean, that is the most profound thing you can actually say. I mean, that's a mic drop right there.
Yeah, I mean,
Ultimately,
but are we encouraged to be
no,
at peace?
we're not encouraged to do that. We're
Mm,
actually told that we should be in fear, we should be very concerned and very upset, and we are definitely not allowed to have fun, definitely not allowed to be creative or to smile or anything.
no.
What I'm finding is that people at home are getting bored. They're tired of looking at the same thing on the news. They're tired of listening to the
Mm,
same thing on their feeds. And so they're just simply saying, well, what do I want to do? And so people are starting to get into other activities to heal their body, doing things they've always wanted to do on the bucket list, different things that they have put off. They're starting to really go deeper into themselves. Some are rebuilding their relationships with people in their families.
yeah.
Some relationships are getting harder, but these are all opportunities to see a different way.
Everything. It's just everything is being catalyzed right now. So if your
Correct.
relationship with your partner sucked, it's going to come to the forefront. If it was amazing, it's going to come to the forefront. If you didn't see your friends more, if you didn't see your friends enough, then you will actually see them more. We just gone. So I've got my headphones under my voluptuous afro thing here. Um, we were in the shop the other day, and it was just like talk radio, and I just heard it, and then just when things pop out of the ether, someone said something like, yeah, 1/3 of people are now baking more and meditating more since the lockdown. And I was
Well,
like,
that's good news.
oh, that's
Why don't
very
we
good.
start why don't we start doing polls on all the good things that people are doing right now?
Yeah, Why not? Let's do it. Let's start with the Facebook group. Let's audit. Let's see where people are at. Let's see what's going on,
Wow,
because
what a
like
great idea.
I noticed over the week I've been a bit quiet in the group over the weekend because I've been immersed in the land of tarot reading, and we went out for a walk and ended up bumping into some friends yesterday, and it was just nice to be around people for like the first time in 4 months. But I'd noticed that like there's some folks are going through pain and they're struggling a little bit, or they're kind of like trying to kind of hang answers on the wrong question maybe. And I was like, well, maybe we need to kind of like see what's going on and kind of take stock and be like, if you're hurting, why are you hurting? If the ascension is hard, of course it's meant to be hard, but let's connect, let's talk, let's see what's going on. We don't need to worry. We don't need to try and I think it's a very human trait to try and find an answer for every problem, but sometimes
Wait,
we just need to
let's
be.
go over that. It's another mic drop right there. That was
Which bit?
that we don't need to find an answer for every problem.
That's it. Sometimes things just
The
are.
guru has spoken. Did you guys hear that? He's full of gems today. Listen, if you're not looking for solutions to problems, what are you doing? You're having fun.
Yeah, exactly. And
You're
then
playing.
also, if you're not looking for solutions to problems, there are no problems to speak of.
Oh, Alastair's on a roll today, you guys. This is it. This is what I'm talking about. That's why we needed to have this show. And unfortunately, the show is coming to an end right now because we're hitting our hour mark. But I just wanted to say, Alastair, you are phenomenal. I'm such a big fan. And thank you so much. And I have a feeling sometimes I watch you and I feel like you just start channeling. You just start saying things that is the truth, and it just comes out. You don't even know where it came from.
I don't want to give away all my secrets, but you are correct.
Absolutely. Well, I could feel the resonance of a channeled a moment. So those two mic drops are extremely important, especially the last one, which is if you're not looking for a problem, there's nothing to solve and there's no problems to be had. So on that note, such a powerful place to stand in your oneness, in your uniqueness, in your love of self, love of life, love of humanity. Do not be ashamed. Do not be shy to be in love. Do not be shy to be in love with yourself or other people, and do not be shy to be who you are, because those days are over. Everybody's over everything. Nobody cares anymore. Everybody's now coming to the surface to actually be who they came here to be on the planet. So you're at the right place at the right time with the right people doing the right thing. And I hope this show did something for you today. Alastair, would you like to say any last words?
I think that the important thing is just to be. If you can't be anything, just be. Don't sweat it. Don't force it. Just be where you are. Because if things don't make sense, you can at least look down at your feet and where you're standing, and then that will make sense, and you can go from there.
I'm not going to say a word after that. Thank you, Alastair.
Thank you.
We love you. We'll see you next Monday, okay?
Yeah,
we'll do it again. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.